He wrote in his chronicles, I, Ashurbanipal, learned the art of writing on clay tablets. I read the beautiful clay tablets from Sumer and the obscure Akkadian writing, which is hard to master. I had my joy in reading the inscriptions on stone from the time before the flood. He preserved these precious records in the Royal Archives in Nineveh. Layard discovered the remains of this library in 1853. He brought to light thousands of clay tablets inscribed in the strange cuneiform writing of the Assyrians. Today, the Assyrians are among the best known of the people of antiquity. We can view their art and read their poems and literature. We know how they lived and how they worshiped. We also know of their wars and their conquests. These then were the Assyrians. They were ruthless, efficient, cruel to their enemies, but also the builders of a remarkable civilization. The Bible tells us that they became, in the words of the prophet Isaiah, the rod of God's anger, a nation used to punish the people of Israel. For a while, the Assyrians were the masters of their world. To their captives, they must have seemed unbeatable. This bas-relief shows King Ashurbanipal's forces assaulting a city using a siege machine which looks amazingly like a modern battle tank. The Assyrians must have thought that their military might would keep them in power forever. But history and the Bible tell another story. About a century and a quarter after Jonah, the Bible shows that God spoke to Nineveh through another prophet, Nahum. At this time, the Assyrians were still masters of their world, but Nahum prophesied that their days were numbered. His words are preserved in the short Old Testament book named after him, the Book of Nahum. In 6 remarkably detailed prophecies, he showed how the pride of the great city would be broken forever. We'll look at these fascinating prophecies and how they were fulfilled in the second half of today's program. Right now, I'd like to offer you this free booklet, Introduction to Prophecy. If you've ever wanted to understand the prophetic books of the Bible, you'll find this booklet very helpful. It takes you step by step towards understanding what they're all about. Introduction to Prophecy will help you begin to gain a new perspective on the past, the present, and more importantly, the future. Be sure to request your free copy of Introduction to Prophecy. And if you're not already a subscriber, we'll also send you a free subscription to the Plain Truth magazine for as long as you like. Earlier, the rediscovery of the remains of the Assyrian Empire was one of the outstanding archaeological discoveries of the last century. Before that time, scholars could read about the Assyrians in the Bible and classical and Arabic literature, but no tangible evidence of them had ever been discovered. Some scholars were doubting that the Bible's history about Assyria was reliable. But as the ruins of Kala, Nineveh, and the other cities of the empire were uncovered, the names of the great kings that struck such terror into the people of the Old Testament, names like Tiglath-Pileser, Sargon, Sennacherib, and Ashurbanipal, were proven to be genuine historical figures. And so the history preserved in the pages of the Bible had to be taken seriously. Not only the history, the rediscovery of the Assyrian Empire also showed the accuracy of another aspect of the Bible, prophecy of future events. We'll see why as we look at the words of Nahum. The Old Testament prophet Nahum lived while the Assyrians were still dominating their world. About 80 years before Nahum wrote, the Assyrians had invaded the kingdom of Israel and taken the people into exile. Nahum's nation Judah had barely escaped. 15 years later, the Assyrians laid siege to the city of Jerusalem, and the Bible shows that it took the intervention of God to save Judah from the same fate as its neighbors. Yes, Nineveh seemed invincible. No one could stand up against its might. But the prophet Nahum confidently predicted its utter destruction. In 6 prophecies, he explained in specific detail how the mighty empire would meet its downfall. Nahum predicted that the city of Nineveh would fall quickly and easily. All your strongholds are fig trees with ripened figs. If they are shaken, they fall into the mouth of the eater. He also forecast that its end would come while the defenders were in a state of drunkenness. For while tangled like thorns and while drunken like drunkards, they shall be devoured like stubble fully dried. Thirdly, Nahum showed that a flood would contribute to Nineveh's downfall. In chapter 1, verse 8, he wrote, "But with an overflowing flood, he, that is God, will make an utter end of its place." And in chapter 2, verse 6, "The gates of the rivers are opened, and the palace is dissolved." Next, Nahum showed that the proud city would burn. "Fire shall devour the bars of your gates." He then warned that after Nineveh had been destroyed by invasion, flood, and fire, it would never rise to prominence again. Other great cities of the ancient world had risen and fallen, often several times, but Nineveh was about to fall once and for all. "Your injury has no healing. Your wound is severe." Finally, he made the astounding prediction that not only would the greatest city of the time fall, but it would also disappear and, to all intents and purposes, be lost to human view. You can see this in chapter 1, verse 14. "The Lord has given a command concerning you. Your name shall be perpetuated no longer. I will dig your grave." So there were 6 specific prophecies that Nahum spoke against the most powerful city of the day. It all seemed so unlikely, but within a few years it happened exactly as Nahum had predicted. As we saw in the first part of today's program, the Assyrian Empire did fall and was lost to view. But as the ruins were identified and slowly uncovered, archaeologists have found confirmation that Nahum's prophecy was indeed fulfilled. The Assyrians were cruel and efficient conquerors, subduing and suppressing many nations, but they overextended themselves. In 612 B.C., a confederation of Scythians, Medes, and Babylonians rose up in rebellion and laid siege to Nineveh. The city was heavily fortified with defensive walls, and it should have been able to withstand the siege, but it fell after only 3 months. Lesser cities had been able to hold out for years, but Nineveh fell to its besiegers suddenly and dramatically, like an overripe fig falling from the tree, just as Nahum had predicted. Why did Nineveh fall so quickly? The classical Greek historian Diodorus of Sicily wrote that the defenders camped outside the main walls became overconfident. Their enemies had not been able to force them to withdraw behind the city's defensive walls. Their commanders, during a drinking bout, let down their guard, allowing the enemy to break through their camp defenses. Remember, Nahum had predicted that the city would fall while the defenders were drunk. Even so, with the outer defenses breached, Nineveh had many fallback positions. The Assyrian forces were able to regroup within the perimeter walls, but now nature intervened. Diodorus wrote, "After heavy rains, the river broke down a distance of the city walls. Besiegers, learning of the break in the walls, attacked." Archaeologists have found a layer of sand and pebbles a few feet below the surface, evidence of the sudden flood that undermined Nineveh's defenses. Once again, Nahum's words were fulfilled. Nahum also predicted that the city would burn. Listen to this report from M.E.L. Malawan, leader of an expedition to Nineveh about 40 years ago. "The condition in which we found the throne room was a dramatic illustration of the final sack. The wall plaster had been packed hard and burnt yellow by flames, and then blackened by soot, which had penetrated into the brickwork itself. The intense heat had caused the south wall to bend inward, and the floor of the chamber itself was buried upon a great pile of burnt debris over 1.5 meters in depth, filled with ash." And so, as Nahum predicted, the greatest city of its time had been conquered, never to rise again, and the palaces, courtyards, and gardens fell into ruins. Soon, all that was left to show where proud Nineveh had been were the shapeless mounds by the Tigris River, until it was rediscovered in the 1840s. As I said earlier, so total was Nineveh's downfall that until then, some scholars doubted it had ever existed. But now we know better. Those ancient mounds, all that remained of ancient Nineveh, have told us something important about history and prophecy. The story of Nineveh, as recorded in the scriptures, in history, and in the archaeological records, shows us that the Bible can be trusted.